Quick disclaimer, this video covers the Mashiba vs. Kimura OVA from the anime Hajime no Ippo. I wanted to cover this because the majority of people will not get to see this amazing OVA, which I believe is the best anime OVA ever made. You can watch this on YouTube for free, though I don't know if the copyright holders would like that, so instead you can watch it on Crunchyroll. I only recommend you watch it on its own if you've seen the first season of Hajime no Ippo, which means the first 75 episodes. If you haven't seen it, then this video is even better for you. I have done my best to make this video accessible to people who haven't watched the anime, so I will avoid spoiling the show itself as much as possible. Think of this as me explaining why the show is so great, like a recommendation video, while covering an obscure OVA to an already slightly obscure series. Got it? Let's begin. Also, this is my first time using a green screen. Hopefully it looks good. I'm doing my best out here.
Do you have that one thing in your life that you really enjoy? Perhaps a hobby. However, you suck at that hobby. I've had this in my own life with baseball. I grew up with baseball, and yet, whenever I tried to play, I sucked. However, it did play a key part of my early social life. It's not something I regret at all. Enter Kimura in Hajime no Ippo. Kimura is someone who went from a common thug to a normal, everyday guy through the medium of boxing. This actually isn't anything extraordinary in the series, as a big theme throughout the show is how the escape of boxing allows people to cast all their problems away and focus on one thing. However, Kimura has never done much for the sport of boxing beyond the simple escape of it. Kimura goes to the same gym as Takamura and Ippo, who have both achieved so much, and yet Kimura is always the one cheering his friends on. We don't really see any elongated fights with Kimura in the show, because he's not a main focus. This OVA puts him as the main focus, which is a unique choice. When you look at the cast of this show, you realize that out of all of them, Kimura is the most bland visually. His dynamic is, after all, the most normal guy of the bunch. It works for the dynamic of everyone else, so you think it would be counterproductive to make him the protagonist of an OVA. But you'd be wrong. It would have been easy to completely change this character since he's such a blank slate, but they didn't. So what did they do? They leaned into that aspect of the character and created an hour-long OVA exploring it. Let's start from the beginning of the OVA. We first hear that Kimura, for the first time in his 5-year career, is getting a championship bout. And not because he's earned it, but rather because he's the number 3 ranked fighter. The number 1 and number 2 ranked fighters declined to fight against the champion. Now, why did they decline to fight against the champion? Well... Ryo Mashiba is one of the most formidable fighters in the entire series. He's someone whose entire life is built around desperation. Ever since his parents died, he's done everything to make money to the detriment of everyone he steps in the ring with. He's someone who's abandoned any sort of joy in boxing, and does it for the sake of giving him and his sister a better life. This noble goal is, of course, in contrast to how he fights people in the ring. Just look at his facial expressions and that should tell you everything. Kimura is the opposite of this. He only boxes because he loves it. Boxing is fun for him. However, that mindset changes with this fight. Kimura wants to finally reach gold and prove that he can do it. He wants to believe he has the skill for it. For this fight, he actually ditches his gym to go to Miyata's gym. Miyata is a counter-hit boxer and former student of the school before moving somewhere else. The reason Kimura goes to Miyata is because he has fought Mashiba once before earlier in this series. When Kimura and Mashiba spar, something happens. Miyata destroys him, but then he claims later on that Kimura has no weaknesses, but also no strengths. The thing is, though, is that Miyata isn't very helpful. He's not a teacher. Kimura, through the rest of the first act, has to figure out ways for himself to improve, which I love. When he watches the tapes of Mashiba, he realizes he needs to close distance. When he sees his dragonfish jump through the air, he realizes that he needs to practice strikes angling upwards. The mundanity of this scene also contributes to how he's just a normal person. Isn't it fitting that the normal guy has a fighting style that is the standard with no specialization as well? His entire training arc in this OVA is to finally reach some specialization, and I love it. It pushes his character in a way that is engaging and unique without completely changing the dynamic that exists in the original show.
I want to take a moment to basically turn this video into Living with Hajime no Ippo, because I found and still find this narrative to be extremely relatable to me. I've been practicing martial arts for over a decade now. I've never really achieved much competitively in that sport, but the people around me have. I'd win every now and then, but I wasn't ever consistent. I enjoyed martial arts for the same reason Kimura enjoys boxing. It's a great escape and a way to release your anger. However, around me were people who are way more talented and devoted than me. Kimura has Takamura in his gym, who throughout the series achieves so many things. I had that same type of person in my studio. Someone who was naturally talented and was someone who achieved so much competitively. I'm a standard martial artist, really. The only thing I have is exceptional power when the sport of it is all about speed and timing. Kimura isn't really talented. He's passionate and loves boxing to death, but he lacks the talent to bring it to the competitive scale, and so do I. One last thing I want to say before I get back to Ippo is the one thing my instructor always told me. Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. However, who is talent in this matchup?
Now, let's move on to the actual fight between them. This is where I must gush about the amazing presentation of Ippo's fights. The majority of anime have a problem I like to call anime presentation. It is a result of the small budget most projects receive. I love the manga to death, but the anime for Baki, I think, suffers from this a lot. The fights just kinda turn into glorified slideshows with character close-ups and sound effects. The motion of the fight that I went into with the raid just isn't there for lower demand anime, and it's not really the fault of the studio. Now, what does Ippo do? Keyword: sound design. Every hit just sounds unique. It's not a typical punching sound, but rather whatever the sound team thought would sound the most insane. Another thing is the character design. George Morikawa, author of Hajime no Ippo, and Keisuke Itagaki, author of Baki, both understood one thing. The bigger you make your character's limbs, the more impact the hits will have. Ippo characters have unique proportions that no anime really has. Mashiba's slim but fast figure is at odds with Kimura's bulky but powerful one. When Mashiba starts doing his signature flicker jabs, it's awesome because his character design suits it. The anime also sports what I believe are known as speed lines, which are done to emphasize movement. These lines even appear along with punches, adding a visual aspect to hits as well. Combine this with how often Ippo shows multiple perspectives in each fight and how characters' thoughts are internalized, you get a very engaging formula. Yes, I know a lot of anime do this, but Ippo does it better than anybody else. The voice acting and the writing carry it to such a high degree, and the culmination of every single aspect is what makes it the best in my opinion. Just listen to the announcer in this show. If you haven't seen this show, you really should. Let's move on to the fight itself, which goes on for nearly half an hour. Just before the fight, Kimura announces to his friends that if he loses, he will retire. I'll come back to this later, but it creates a lot more tension in this fight. The gong rings and the fight begins. Kimura goes in, but is soon greeted by a great music cue into Mashiba assuming his stance. Kimura tries to go in, but gets hit directly. Mashiba starts to do his flicker jab, stopping Kimura from getting in. Kimura needs to duck and weave if he wants to get in. Mashiba soon recognizes what Kimura is trying to do, showing Mashiba's strength as a boxer. Nothing looks good for Kimura though. He hasn't landed a single strike, but hasn't fully been blasted. It's pointed out by the characters that he won't last long. The crowd is dead because from their perspective this is no different to any other Mashiba fight. Kimura successfully dodges a hit but can't follow up, which was a plot point that was explored earlier throughout this OVA. He learned this whole thing step by step earlier, and now he's learning it with his instinct, which is something I find myself having to do. The first round ends, and nothing looks good for Kimura. I like the exchange with Mashiba where Kimura says he's been hanging on for 5 years in response to Mashiba's surprise of lasting the first round. More tension is added to the fight once Mashiba's inner monologue says,
6人のボクサーが俺と戦って引退してるからなのさ。そして貴様で7人目だ。
Rounds go by, and Kimura has done nothing but get beat on. The stress of the ring has neutered his training. However, it takes him 6 rounds to even hit the floor, showing his resilience. Kimura's parents leave their seats, tired of seeing their son get executed in front of them. This is where it's revealed that Kimura's never amounted to much until this very moment. They're thankful for how boxing changed him from a delinquent to an actual person. This sentiment to me is beautiful because it shows a parent's perspective on how martial arts really help with your life. Once again, showing multiple perspectives in this fight. Aoki soon points out how much he and Kimura struggles, which I like. Aoki, Kimura's best friend, being his corner is a fantastic touch, showing how great their friendship is. Ippo's success is briefly brought up in Monologue 2, which I find immensely relatable as I'm someone who's often surrounded by people who are state and district champions. Mashiba starts to slow down and Kimura starts to get offense in. The crowd finally wake up and cheer his name, but even then, all of Kimura's attacks were blocked. Though all of his attacks were body blows, in which Kimura explains as a way to set Mashiba up. Kimura has Mashiba blocking low, meaning it's time to go for the dragonfish blow. Kimura's monologue really emphasizes how important this chance is and how it's all or nothing. By the 8th round, the music changes to what I can only describe as a equal footing type track. Kimura finally goes for that dragonfish blow, and everything about it is jubilating. The way the music starts to conclude and how the shots show each part of the rotation of the body, finally leading to the reaction shots of his friends and family. This is a wonderful moment that is expertly presented. Mashiba soon hits the floor to the surprise of everyone. Mashiba, the Japanese champion of the weight class, is on the floor pondering how a nobody could bring him down. Mashiba loses any train of thought when he instantly rises up at the count of 7 like a zombie. All that matters to Mashiba now is destroying his opponent. Humiliated when this was supposed to be an easy win. He repeats his flicker jabs but doesn't react in time to counteract Kimura stepping in and landing a successful body blow. Mashiba then does more flicker jabs to the same result. This state of repeating the same mistakes is easy to find yourself in when you're frustrated in any sort of match. I've had it happen to me all sorts of times. It's that desperation to finally get something in that drives you to repeat mistakes. Kimura hammers in on Mashiba's body before finally going for another dragonfish blow. Mashiba stutters trying to correct his behavior and reset. This results in the dragonfish blow connecting, making Mashiba fall forwards. Mashiba only has one person in the crowd cheering him on, his sister. That one cheer gives him the strength to clinch onto Kimura for dear life. The round ends before Mashiba lets go. I love that people in the crowd say he's a desperate, lousy champion, but Kimura describes him as determined, which I think is fantastic, showing an understanding in his opponent. The round begins and the second opening song plays. This is usually used for when a character is about to win. Everything seems even though. Someone is going down, but who? They trade blows until Mashiba lands 2 powerful strikes before railing on Kimura, begging him to go down, but he doesn't. It's now Kimura's turn to wail on the opponent. Mashiba admits to his opponent's strength before attempting a clinch in which Kimura reads and pounds on him more. Kimura starts to picture the championship. It's within reach, but Soon after the music ends, they both punch at the same time. A mouth guard goes flying in the air, but we can't see who hit who. It's a guessing game over who connected, and the suspense is through the roof. That one shot added so much more depth to this scene, and it's amazing. However, the next shot after is a far back one of Mashiba with his mouth guard on. Kimura couldn't reach for the belt, both physically and metaphorically. The coach tries to throw in the towel, but Aoki stops him, begging for Kimura to be the one to lose, the one to decide that he is lost. Kimura somehow does get up to the shock of everyone. He raises his arms by the 8 count and is ready to go. The match is about to continue, and it does. Mashiba questions how one can go this far and uses the word kill when talking about Kimura. They show a flashback to Kimura saying if he loses, he will retire. Mashiba charges at him like a rabid animal with intent to kill, but then this happens.
レフェリーがチャンピオンを止めた。これはどうした？もう意識が。
Mashiba wins by standing knockout. It's an ending that feels so wrong. We spent all this time in this OVA just for Kimura to lose. I can recall the first time I watched this moment and I broke down. While the moment itself is absolutely heartbreaking for the character, that wasn't what made me cry. It was a sudden realization that I've seen this before. This happened to me. I trained for a big martial arts tournament and did everything I could to win. I traveled across the country for it and lost the tournament in my first round. I felt exactly what Kimura felt. That feeling that you try so hard for something you love, but you have no talent for it. That doesn't just extend to martial arts, but what about anything else? How many of you love watching a sport but know that you couldn't ever bring it professionally? How many of you couldn't make money doing the thing you love most? Talent is one of the things that you can't control. You can do better at something through hard work, but there could be someone who tries half as hard with twice the talent, and it won't matter. This anime about people learning how to box captured this heartbreaking narrative through what was essentially an hour-long spin-off project. If I excluded the final 5 minutes of the OVA, then this narrative would be extremely bleak and potentially in the running for the most depressing thing I've seen, in contention with Darren Aronofsky films. Kimura visits the arena with empty fans and his old gym. Everything seems sad and depressing, but there is a moment when something in Kimura clicks, and not just for him, but for me. Kimura is seen on a hill with the sunset blaring. He harps on the idea that if his arm was longer, he would have won. He breaks down, crying over his loss, but he stops himself.
本当は後悔してる。ずっとこの先ずっとたった3センチのために後悔し続けるのか。たった3センチ俺は一生引きずっていくのか。嫌だ。そんなの嫌だ。
Even when at rest, all he thought was boxing. Sitting around and moping about a past issue isn't something that's healthy. Boxing wasn't to blame. He still loves boxing, so why should he blame failures on it when he could just keep moving forwards? There's no harm in continually doing something you love but can't bring to that professional level. The remediation of sports and martial arts and really any competitive thing is something that is still worth it. It may sound corny, but doing that kind of stuff is not about winning. It's about effort. It's about the people you meet and the stories you can tell. The number one thing I want you guys to take from this video is to not stop doing the hobbies you love. That hobby can turn you from a delinquent to someone valued by everybody. If you think this narrative is what the whole of Hajime no Ippo is about, then you'd be mistaken. Hajime no Ippo is a 100+ long episode shonen anime that has so many stories that you can correlate to real life. It's a slice of life anime disguised as a shonen sports one. It's a show purely about going through life with boxing. I only talked about this OVA, but I didn't even bring up how fantastic Nakanochi Ippo is as the main character, or how Takamura might be my favorite side character ever. This show has something for everybody. If you haven't seen it, give it a try. If you have seen it, then I hope you appreciate this video and what I had to say. See you all later.